Oh, welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter and flying solo for this episode. But hey, we got a terrific guest lined up. Robert Behrens from Good Bull Hunting, Texas A&M insider, going to join the show to talk a little Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban feuding, fussing. We got some quarterback commitment news in the SEC. The Florida Gators landed them a much-needed and interesting receiver out of the transfer portal, so we're going to talk about that. We've got some trash talk from one of these PGA golfers and a little update on SEC future schedulings. That's going to be the big topic there when the spring meetings occur next week in Destin, Florida. So all that on this episode of the show. But let's start with this. We always love to start with a little viral clip or video if we got it. And, full transparency, I don't follow golf that much. I play a little. I drink a lot more when I'm out there than I do anything else. But I got no idea the backstory here that this guy, Justin Thomas, apparently just won a tournament, was doing the interviews after the event and asked about winning I think it was the PGA Championship is what it's called. And he threw some shade at old Jimbo. So let's kick it over to Justin Thomas, who I have to assume is an Alabama grad based on these comments.
Without asking an Alabama-related question, Nick Saban has a 24-hour rule. Mm-hmm. How long is the Justin Thomas Celebrate the PGA Championship rule?
Yeah, I got a 24-hour rule. Maybe I'm not sure what Jimbo Fisher's rule is, but I guess he's got to win something first before he figures out his rule. So I don't know. I'm playing next week, so we'll enjoy it. But at the same time, we're in the middle of a very, very big stretch of this season. So
all right. So hey, a nice little dig there at Jimbo Fisher from Justin Thomas, but it doesn't completely make sense because hell, there's only 5 coaches actively coaching a Division I football that have won a national championship. Jimbo Fisher is on that list. Texas A&M beat Alabama last year. I know they didn't live up to the hype. We all seen the 8-4 jokes and everything, but I shake my head a little bit here when people say Jimbo's not won anything when he's one of the more accomplished coaches in the sport. Now, that doesn't mean he's can't be criticized because we recently had Dave Bartu on the show, CFB Matrix. Go back and check that one out if you missed it. Jimbo Fisher, one of the lowest graded coaches at the Power 5 level last season. So, hey, we can critique the guy, but just don't say he's not won anything because that's pretty far from the truth. And hell, he just whipped Nick Saban in recruiting too, and that's why there's all this feuding between the two that we're going to talk with Robert Behrens about here in a minute. But the big topic here in the SEC, looking ahead to next week's spring meetings, Cousin Shane scheduled to be on the next episode. He's working, he's walking, he's a busy man. He's actually in the middle of a move too. So he says he's going to be on the next episode. We'll hold it to him. But that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to go a little bit deeper dive on these future SEC schedulings. But I want to give a shout out to Ross Dellinger, Sports Illustrated. Read an article he put out here on Tuesday morning. I highly recommend everybody go check it out. But according to Ross, who's one of the best insiders in the SEC, the conference is going to be essentially down to 2 scheduling models here next week in Destin that they're going to decide upon. Now, when it comes to the scheduling models, there's a lot to work out. And the biggest issue, moving aside from just the scheduling, the SEC has got to figure out whether they want to stick at 8 conference games annually or they want to move to 9. Now, I think, listeners of this show know I'm a big proponent of the 9-game schedule and everything it does for you, but there are little hiccups in it. Obviously, if you're having 9 conference games annually, harder to make a bowl game, and potentially the biggest obstacle, some teams are going to have 5 SEC home games, while others are only going to have 4 SEC home games. That's the nature of having a 9-game conference slate. You're going to have to work around that. So in the 9-game conference schedule format, of course, you'd have the 3 permanent rivals, 6 rotating. That's what we've been discussing all off season. But there is some programs that want to stay at 8 conference games annually with only one permanent rivalry. You rotate the other 7, and you'd still be able to go through a conference, the entire conference here, in a 2-year cycle. So that's a big issue that we're going to have to decide down in Destin. Hopefully they iron out the details of it. But again, I think we're going to go on a lot deeper dive with this topic with Cousin Shane on the next episode of the show. But here's one way to look at this, because I understand people are going to say, well, that's not fair. You can't have some teams with 5 SEC home games, others with 4. I think there's a real opportunity there to, make the SEC a little bit more competitive. And here's a perfect example that I thought of today leading up to the show. Imagine this is a season where Alabama's got only 4 SEC home games, and Texas A&M, Arkansas, Ole Miss, maybe they're one of the ones that has 5 SEC home games, including, of course, hosting the Crimson Tide. Maybe that gives you the edge one year you need. In the East, we could flip it that way too. Everybody thinks Georgia's just going to run through the East. What if this is a year where Georgia's only got 4 SEC home games? And hell, it may be a Florida year where they may really only have 3 games in Athens. Whereas Kentucky, this may be a year they get 5 SEC home games, or Tennessee. And, it would just make, I think it would help create some unique challenges for certain programs. Now, again, you'd flip it the next year and Georgia's got 5 home games and Alabama's got 5. I understand. But, that little uniqueness, that's what makes college football great. And special seasons come together for certain foes. And hell, just because you only got 4 SEC home games doesn't mean you're not going to win the conference. The special teams, think back LSU 2019, the rugged schedule they had to go through. They won at Texas. They had to beat Ohio State and Clemson. They had to win at Alabama. Just because you got to go on the road doesn't mean it's a guaranteed loss. A lot of times that makes your team tougher. And hell, when LSU that year got to the college football playoff, there was no one in hell is going to slow down Joe Burrow and company. So I don't know. We'll see what Cousin Shane has to say. We'll see what comes out of Destin, but I think we got to go 9-game conference schedule. It's going to make, we get rid of some of these cupcakes. We get more action. And this is a lot of it's about TV revenue and more games. But, really it's for the fans too, because there's so many years where, I'm looking at the season tickets for this team or that team, and you got 1 or 2 games to look forward to. We got to do away with that. And hell, even if, we're talking, again, some teams may only have 4 SEC home games in a year. Maybe that's a South Carolina. Maybe that's a Florida. Maybe that's a Kentucky. I throw them out because they've got elite non-conference permanent opponents. Maybe the years where Florida only has 4 SEC home games, you throw in Florida State. You make sure, the league office makes sure whenever Florida State is supposed to come to Gainesville, maybe that's the year Florida doesn't quite get as many home games as some of the others. Maybe you do the same thing with the Kentucky. You only got 4 SEC home games this year. We'll put that on the same year you host Louisville. And same thing, South Carolina, Clemson. So I understand all sides of this. We've got to create fairness, but hell, college football is not necessarily based on fairness. And we all know that after Saban's viral comments over the last couple of weeks. So, I cannot wait to see how this plays out, giving us a lot to talk about here, but unless I hear a more compelling case for staying at an 8-game conference schedule, and that's another thing, if we stay at 8 and we only got 1 permanent rival, we're going to lose. I wouldn't imagine we're going to lose Georgia, Florida, but we'll lose Georgia, Auburn. We'll lose Tennessee, Alabama. There's a lot of good rivals. We'll probably lose Tennessee, Kentucky, games like this that mean something to a lot of people. Whereas the 3 permanents, you get to keep a lot of these traditional games. So here's to hoping they stick to a 9-game SEC schedule. Now, next on the docket, real quick, let's kick it on down to Tuscaloosa. Where the Alabama Crimson Tide picked up an interesting commitment on Tuesday, Eli Holstein, 4-star quarterback out of the state of Louisiana, and interestingly enough, a former Texas A&M commit. That bad blood keeps on brewing between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher, but he has commit to Alabama. He's the number 8 quarterback prospect in the country, a top 60 overall prospect in the 2023 class. And, I don't want to, it's his moment, Holstein's moment. Let's hope he's a future star for the Alabama Crimson Tide. But naturally, what I immediately think of, as do many others, and why this is important around the SEC and in Austin, Texas, Arch Manning, long thought to be the top target there for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Does this mean Arch isn't going to Tuscaloosa? Everybody's naturally making that assumption, but I don't think that's based on any real intel. Arch Manning is scheduled to visit Tuscaloosa in early June. If he makes that trip, clearly he's still interested in the Crimson Tide. And I have heard behind the scenes that Nick Saban has taken the lead on recruiting Arch Manning, and I think the Manning family is obviously impressed with Nick Saban's pitch. Now, again, maybe Alabama got tired of waiting around for Arch Manning, but that doesn't make a ton of sense to me, considering that, again, he is scheduled to visit in early June. So would they really tell Arch he needs to make this decision before a scheduled visit? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I still think Alabama is going to be recruiting Arch Manning. But of course, if you're a Georgia Bulldog, if you're a Texas Longhorn, you have got to love this news, because all of a sudden you could pitch to Arch, hey, you truly are our number one man. Nick Saban may have told you that, but hell, he's taking another quarterback. We're not even discussing anything with any quarterbacks, and that would be my pitch if I'm Steve Sarkisian or Kirby Smart. So we'll see where the dominoes go here with Eli Holstein, one of the top quarterback prospects in the country. And again, hell, maybe he's better than Arch Manning. I don't know. Arch Manning is, at this point, he's all hype until he gets to college, and he does it. I wish them both well. But, Alabama fans should be happy they got Eli Holstein here. Solid prospect. Again, a top 60 overall recruit in the country, number 8 overall quarterback prospect. He's now a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, next, let's kick it on down to Gainesville real quick. Where one of the biggest issues there for the Florida Gators this spring, something Billy Napier hinted at time and time again, receiver issue, depth in particular. Well, the Gators landed Ricky Pershaw from Arizona State. He was Arizona State's leading receiver last year in every statistical category: receptions, 48, receiving yards, 580, and receiving touchdowns with 4. I went back, he was a third-year sophomore last season for Arizona State, so he's got multiple seasons to play. And, of course, I'm sure Florida fans know this. Maybe some others in the SEC don't. Billy Napier, before he was Louisiana's head coach, he was the offensive coordinator and I believe receivers coach at Arizona State. So he's got a little backstory here. He's got a little relationship with Ricky Pershaw here. And I went back and watched some of his highlights. I haven't watched much Arizona State football, but looks like a big-time performer here that could certainly help the Florida Gators. A little bit bigger of a target, very long arms, deceptively fast type prospect. It almost looks like a tight end, and I don't want to say he's going to be a tight end for the Florida Gators because I have no idea, but that is a position where the Gators were down to one healthy body. So I could see this Pershaw being more of an H-back, play receiver, tight end, a little bit of everything in Billy Napier's offense. And again, given his previous relationship that he had with Billy Napier, they know what they're getting in Arizona State's leading receiver here. So this is a really nice pickup for the Florida Gators and someone that should factor in immediately with the team next season. But all right, hey, I've held off long enough. Let's kick it over to our interview with Robert Behrens, the managing editor of Good Bull Hunting over at SB Nation. All right, we're pleased to once again be joined by Robert Behrens, friend of the show, has been on the show once before, and of course he covers the Texas A&M Aggies for Good Bull Hunting of SB Nation. He's the managing editor over there, and you got to give Robert a follow. on Twitter at RCB05, where truly, Robert, you are one of the most entertaining Twitter feeds out there. So I cannot thank you enough for joining me here.
Absolutely, man. Glad to waste some time in the off season with you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the hottest topic, not only in the SEC, but really in all of college football, this back and forth between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. We'll get to Fisher in just a second, but what was your initial thoughts, Robert, when you heard or saw the tweet, that Nick Saban was out here calling A&M out, Jimbo, and essentially said, what he did say, A&M's, paid every single player in their recruiting class.
I mean, overall, I just kind of wonder, where this is coming from with Saban, because, we just heard him just in recent weeks talking about how he wants more parity in college football, and now he's calling out A&M, and he's saying that A&M's buying players, and this is something that not every school can do. But Nick didn't have any problem when Alabama's pumping millions of dollars into facilities upgrades to lure players there. He didn't have a problem when Alabama has a bigger staff than any other program in college football to lure players there and to give resources that players want. And so I don't understand why all of a sudden, when that money is just going directly to players instead of to all these other ancillary benefits, why that's suddenly a huge issue. Because college football has always been about the haves and the have-nots. And if anything, A&M from a program success perspective has been a have-not. So if you want parity, isn't a program that just got their first ever number one recruiting class more parity? Isn't the first, non-Alabama and Georgia team to have a number one class since 2012 more parity? And so, as Jimbo said, it's as much as Saban is trying to make this sound like he's worried about what's good for the game, it sounds more like sour grapes of what's not good for Nick Saban.
Yeah, and you see all these anonymous articles. That certainly seems to be people that know Nick, people that know Jimbo saying, hey, this is a guy that hates to even finish second, which he did. The Alabama finished second, of course, in the country. They finished second in recruiting to Texas A&M. This is a guy that seriously, he cannot handle losing. So right after that, of course, Jimbo Fisher, this was like the most incredible press conference I've ever seen. It was impromptu, not even scheduled, but he had to address those allegations. What was your response right after Jimbo just, dropped the mic there on Nick Saban in Alabama?
I think myself, just like everybody else, initially you're kind of just shell-shocked because you're not used to hearing coaches be that direct and basically say what all the fans and everyone else is thinking. So just from that perspective alone, I kind of loved it because we rag on coaches so often for not really giving us information, for just kind of being generic and giving coach speak because they don't want to be controversial. So for Jimbo to, really, he just went no holds barred and he just spilled the tea. It was really refreshing, and it was fun to see, even just as a college football fan in general, but certainly as an A&M fan, it's great to see Jimbo to stick up for the program and basically just fight fire with fire. That if Saban's going to be really reckless and throwing around allegations, then A&M and Jimbo are going to be just as aggressive right back at him. And if nothing else, it's normally May is one of the most boring, uneventful times of the off season. So it's given us all a lot of entertainment, if nothing else.
Yeah, no doubt, Robert. And right around the corner, we got SEC spring meetings. And normally, they're pretty tame. They're pretty mild. They're not that interesting. But I don't know about you, buddy, but if the SEC network wants to stream this thing, hell, I'd even pay for pay-per-view if they want to, put it in the moment Jimbo and Nick come into the same room. That's must-see TV at the moment, don't you think?
Yeah, it's definitely putting a lot of interest into stuff that normally even us hardcore fans kind of gloss over this time of year. So I think, between media days and the meetings, and then, of course, that rematch coming up on October 8th, there's going to be no shortage of some really interesting interactions with Jimbo and Nick through the next few months.
Now, this may have already been the case. Let me know what you think, Robert. But with Texas coming into the SEC, I think everyone was thinking, oh, okay, now here's A&M's main rival, in football back in the SEC. But following this last week, following this last year of just kind of the battles on the field and on the recruiting trail, what's the sense from Aggie fans? Is Alabama now the number one rival in the SEC for the Texas A&M Aggies?
I will say with Texas coming in, I think that's probably still not going to be the case because once Texas is here, as much as obviously beating Bama is always going to be high on everyone's list, because if you beat Bama, you probably have a decent chance at making some serious noise in the SEC. That Texas rivalry has so much history, and you see on Twitter to this day, even though A&M and Texas haven't played each other since 2011, I mean, the two teams and the two fan bases in particular are just constantly comparing themselves to one another, and I'm just as guilty of it as anybody. Just because it's fun to stir the pot. I probably have, outside of Aggies, I think Longhorns is probably like my second, biggest fan base that I have that follows me. So yeah, there's a lot of history there that's not going to go away. And that said, as far as the A&M Alabama rivalry, I think until the past 9 months, that probably was a very one-sided affair that maybe A&M fans thought like it was a rivalry, but probably only because every school thinks that they're rivals with Alabama because everyone hates Alabama because they're jealous of Alabama. But maybe now between, it started about this time last year with Jimbo, claiming that he was going to beat Saban's ass while he was still there, and then Saban saying what in golf. And then, of course, Jimbo followed up on it and made good on his promise. And then you had, and even going back to on signing day, Jimbo kind of went off on his signing day press conference too, based on comments from some of this NIL stuff. And now it's just blown up even more with comments in these recent days. So definitely, I think that's a rivalry that, even though it was already going to be competitive this year, because I think both teams are going to be really good, it adds some extra spice to it, without a doubt.
Yeah, and so now everybody in college football, not just the SEC, I know A&M fans and Alabama fans had already circled that October 8th trip to Tuscaloosa. And now, like I said, the entire college football world is going to be descending and keeping an eye on that game. I got to imagine College Game Day's already making their plans to cover that game. I know it's, it may be a little too far to look out, but this is going to be the most anticipated Texas A&M game since when, in your opinion?
I would say probably since the game against Alabama back in 2013, which, coincidentally, it was, once again, like the year after A&M had knocked off Alabama in 2012. Of course, that game was, two top 5 teams. It was Johnny Manziel in his, following up on his Heisman campaign. And, there's been a few other games since then where it's like maybe you've had like 2 top 10 teams, but I think from a national perspective, this probably will be the biggest microscope on A&M since that 2013 game. And of course, that's all assuming that you're looking at undefeated teams by then. I think, A&M has, I think it's 5 games before that. So, and as we saw last year, even against, the Mississippi States and Arkansas, that nothing's a guarantee in the SEC. So, highly anticipated matchup rankings wise, but either way, with this Jimbo and Saban feud, it should be fun no matter what the records are.
Now, any chance, Robert, that, I know the expectations are already high in College Station. They're trying to win the West, trying to win the SEC, but any chance that, this offseason with all these allegations and all that fuels this Texas A&M team to be even better than they would have been? Because, I've seen Anaya Smith come out. Yeah, clearly we've seen Jimbo, hitting, the battle cry, so to speak. So do you think there's a chance any of this offseason drama motivates the Aggies on the field this season?
I think it could, because, players and coaches for an edge, and those guys are highly competitive, highly motivated, so they're always trying to find something to fuel themselves to do even more. And A&M has faced a lot of criticism this offseason, be it from when they backed out of the bowl game because of COVID, or then going to the number one recruiting class and people saying that they essentially just bought that recruiting class. I think there's been a lot of external criticism, and it may have kind of galvanized that team and that program in kind of an us against the world mentality. Now, granted, you can argue how much all that stuff is really that important at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, it's about coaching and it's about talent. But the good news is A&M should already have both of those things, and hopefully you've got a lot of guys in the right mindset and out there to prove a lot of people wrong.
Now, recently over at Good Bull Hunting, you wrote about, everybody wants to talk about pods, if that's what we're going to call them. But essentially what we're talking about, of course, everybody knows by now, a couple, 3 permanent rivals is kind of what it seems like we're trending towards. That's not official by any means. But if the league does go to 3 permanent rivals, you listed out Arkansas, LSU, and Texas as 3 for the Aggies. Is that the way you want to see it, or is that just the way you kind of think it's going to go?
I mean, if I had my preference, that would be who A&M would play, because I think Texas and Arkansas are both no-brainers because you've got such history with those 2 programs, even going back to the old Southwest Conference days. And then LSU, I would say, is the closest thing A&M has had to a natural, legit rivalry in the SEC, because those teams, did play a fair amount, even going back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then obviously the game was played on rivalry weekend. The biggest thing that was holding it back was the fact that in Kevin Sumlin's tenure, A&M never won against LSU. And obviously that's changed a little bit under Jimbo. They've gone 2-2 against LSU. But I think just both historically and geographically, those are easily the 3 teams that make the most sense for A&M to play on an annual basis going forward.
And then last thing for you, Robert, I really appreciate you taking some time here, but we haven't caught up with you since spring practice. So just wanted to get your thoughts on the quarterback competition. Clearly no one's going to win it here in the summer. They're going to wait till training camp, but you got the transfer Max Johnson. Of course, you got Haynes King, who was the starter last year before he went down. And then, I keep hearing great things about the 5-star freshman, Connor Weigman. How's this thing looking, and who do you think will be the starter come opening weekend?
I think at this point, it truly is a legit 3-person race. That said, I do feel like the dynamics have shifted, at least from what I thought it was before spring ball. Going into the spring, I thought that Haynes King was the clear front runner. I thought Max Johnson, just because he's a veteran guy who has a lot of SEC playing experience, would play a role. And from the very beginning, I said I don't count out Weigman, because that guy has all the talent in the world. And so if he can come in, and coming in January, he gets the full spring, the full summer, just kind of, you never know what'll happen. But after the spring game, which I do caution everyone, don't try to read too much into the spring game, because we've all done that at our own peril. And just look at Ajay Hall for Alabama last year. But Max Johnson really impressed me, and I thought he played the best out of the 3. And I'll also say that Weigman, while maybe he didn't look quite as good, he didn't look like a guy who just flat out wasn't ready. He didn't look like a guy that you watched and said, okay, he needs to have a redshirt season. So as those guys progress and they're still learning the system and they're going through the program, I truly would not count out any of the 3, even the true freshmen in that race. So that's going to be really interesting, just because of the way A&M's roster is built. They're ready to contend at pretty much every other position. And quarterback, last year, where, all due respect to Zach Calzada, but quarterback play was A&M's Achilles heel in 2021. And so that's something that if they can solve that in 2022, no matter which of those three guys it is, I think, that's what could move this team from an 8-4 team to potentially 10-2, 11-1, and contending for the SEC.
Yeah, and the good news with that, like you said, is with it being a loaded room and a close call, you got Sam Houston and Appalachian State right out the gate, so it's not like you got some big non-conference game that you have to have your guy. I mean, you want your guy by the opener, but still, you got 2 games to kind of figure out before Miami comes to town. You know what?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's as much as everyone rags on SEC schools and A&M in particular about scheduling. That's the benefit of it, is that you can have those kind of games to get your feet wet, especially breaking in a new QB and just kind of figure some things out before. Miami coming to town, and that'll be, I think, our first big test, absolutely, because from what I'm hearing with Mario Cristobal and the staff that he's put together there, and all of the activity they've had in the transfer portal, there's a good chance that they could be back to being a pretty salty team as well. So that's not something that A&M can overlook.
All right, some outstanding stuff from Robert Behrens. Again, give him a follow at RCB05, and you can find that in the show notes. And check out all his work at Good Bull Hunting, part of the SB Nation Networks. Robert, thank you.
Thanks and gig 'em, man.
All right, so just want to say thanks, Robert, for joining the show once again. He's been on the show a couple of times now, and some outstanding insight into the Texas A&M Aggies there. I hope you Aggie fans appreciate Robert's appearance there. And like I said, we got Cousin Shane lined up for the next episode. I got a line out to another interview, another guest of the show that's been on before that should be highly entertaining to close the week strong. So hopefully we'll have 2 more shows before the week's out, before we get to SEC spring meetings down there in Destin. But that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We'll catch you on the next one.